Thanks for coming out today, everyone. On behalf of the Federalist Society, I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's event. I just want to do a quick introduction for our speakers today, and then I'll let them get to it. So first, standing to my right is Professor Josh Blackman, who's an associate professor of law at the South Texas College of Law, Houston, who specializes in constitutional law, the United States Supreme Court, and the intersection of law and technology. He is the author of the critically acclaimed Unprecedented, the Constitutional Challenge to Obamacare, and Unraveled, Obamacare, Religious Liberty, and Executive Power. Professor Blackman was selected by Forbes magazine for the 30 Under 30 in Law and Policy. He has twice testified before the House Judiciary Committee on the constitutionality of executive action on immigration and healthcare. He is an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. Professor Blackman is the founder and president of the Harlan Institute, the founder of Fantasy SCOTUS, which is the internet's premier Supreme Court fantasy league, and blogs at joshblackman.com. He's an author.
You forgot something. I've also sued your attorney general a couple times.
That too. He is the author of over 4 dozen law review articles, and his commentary has appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, USA Today, the LA Times, and other national publications. Providing commentary today is our own Professor Maltz. Professor Maltz is a distinguished professor here at Rutgers. He is the author of Rethinking Constitutional Law, Originalism, Interventionism, and the Politics of Judicial Review, Civil Rights, the Constitution and Congress, and over 50 articles on constitutional law, statutory interpretation, the role of the courts, and legal history. He received his BA from Northwestern University, where he was elected to Phi Beta Kappa, and his JD cum laude from Harvard. Professor Maltz teaches con law, employment discrimination, conflicts of law, and has a seminar on the Supreme Court. Without further ado. And also, the food's running a little bit late, but it will be here, I promise.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I am actually from Staten Island, so this is very... Staten Island?
Yeah, I lived there for like 9 years.
Where'd you live?
Oh, right by the mall, like Richmond-ish.
Richmond and where?
Oh God, I don't know. Like
I lived up Richmond Avenue also. Where'd you go to school?
I went to PS 69.
Okay, I went to PS 42.
Oh, I know where that is though.
Okay. We're basically in the same shtetl, it's basically the same town. So it's always a pleasure to be here in New Jersey. I am from Staten Island. This is basically home for me. Also, it's fitting because I have some litigation going on in this jurisdiction. Your AG sued me a couple of times. I sued him a couple of times. We'll talk about it. We'll have some fun. Seriously. The topic of the day is 3D printed guns. But this case isn't only about the Second Amendment. Indeed, it's primarily about the First Amendment. Specifically, how can the government restrict the sharing of information that can be used to 3D print a gun? So let's start with some basics. Who here has ever actually used a 3D printer? Yeah, what'd you make?
Like a windmill prototype.
Windmill, okay. What'd you make?
Just scaffolding.
Scaffolding, anyone else? Okay. Every time I give this talk, more and more people have used 3D printing. What is 3D printing? It's a way of designing an object on a screen, whether it's a car or a house or whatever, and translating that object into a real-life object. Now, did you find the process of 3D printing, creating the code, a little bit difficult, a little bit tricky? Yeah, it's somewhat labor-intensive. Let me give you a brief tutorial of how to design an object. Now, this involves math. I know law students hate math, but I'll give you a little bit of math, right? Let's say I want to make a cylinder, right, like a tip of a pencil. If I tell you I want to make a cylinder with a height of 20 and a radius of 5, height of 20 inches, radius of 5 inches, you know roughly what I'm asking for, right? This is how 3D printing works. You develop code in language basically anyone can understand with a little bit of training, and you can translate it. Now you can print out little plastic trinkets or windmills or scaffolding, more intricate objects, or even a race car, which is what's being printed right over here. Now I want to show you how the 3D printer actually operates. It functions very much like making a candle. Has anyone ever made a candle before? You know how to do this, right? How do you make a candle? You take the wick, you dip in the wax, you pull it out. You dip in the wax, you pull it out, and you keep dipping it, right? Every time you dip it, it gets a little thicker around the base. 3D printing works in the exact same fashion, but instead of dipping a candle, you spray. You spray a very thin layer of plastic. So here they're printing a ball. and the bullet isn't quite finished, right? And this little motor moves around and sprays the plastic in different places. Sometimes you have a heated surface, and you spray it down. Now, let me show you a demonstration of how a 3D printer operates. This is going to be printing an object. You will recognize this object eventually, but let's see how quickly you can recognize it. Good test for your coordination skills, right? So here's the first step. It spits out this layer of this sort of honeycomb lattice. Okay, here's number 2. Gets a little bit taller. Number 3 gets a little taller. Anyone know what it is? Anyone see it yet? Okay, that's 3. Here's 4. Here's 5. Frog, you're in the ballpark. Okay, here's 6. A what? A Pokemon. You're in the ballpark. You're in the ballpark. There's 6.
A lizard.
A lizard. You're really close. 7.
A gecko.
Oh, you're so close, but you're wrong.
The guy from Gecko.
You're so close, but wrong. 8.
The frog from the Trolleys.
Yoda.
Ah, give her the Lexus points. Okay, she gets 1,000,000 Lexus points. I'll give her unlimited Lexus Nexus points forever. Okay, it's Yoda, right? You see it? There it is. Okay, now everyone sees it. Okay. Okay. Now you see. Okay, come on, guys. Which one was it? And I'm going to pause here and let you guys get your donuts. So we'll break here.
Oh, thank you so much. Let's just get set up real quick, guys, and then you
Yeah.
can all come up and grab some grub.
Okay. So this is how 3D printing operates. Okay. It's not that complicated. But of course, because we live in America, what do people want to print? No, not Yoda. They want to print guns. So several years ago, a law student at the University of Texas at Austin developed the Liberator. This is the blueprint for a Liberator. It was the first fully functional plastic firearm that could be made with a 3D printer. This is the barrel of the Liberator. Now, I played a trick on you before, right? I showed you how to make a cylinder. What is the barrel of a gun? It's a cylinder. So I actually showed you how to make a gun. I may have actually just violated New Jersey law. Holy cow. Are there any non-US citizens here? Okay, I think I'm actually safe. But I think actually I didn't violate federal law. I think you violated New Jersey law because I shared information on how to make a gun. If the Attorney General wants to indict me, I will be waiting. But the simple point is I conveyed information to you how to make a gun. That's what I did. Defense Distributed, which I represent, is a firm in Austin, and they made a number of devices. They made the lower receiver for an AR-15. They made the magazine for an M4. And they also designed this. These are the parts of the Liberator. These are all the individual parts. Okay? These things completely made of metal. What are these little squiggly things? These are the springs which you pull back to hit it. The only metal parts are number 1, the bullet. Bullets are made of metal. They get detected. And number 2, a nail. Right? Why do you need a nail? The nail strikes the back of the bullet and makes it go pow. Yeah.
You said both the metal objects are also made by the 3D printer?
No. These are
Those are
you can buy them. You can buy the nail at a hardware store, and the bullet you can buy anywhere. So those are not made with a 3D printer. Okay. And this is what the Liberator looks like fully assembled. Now, there's a certain aspect of plastic that you have to understand. Plastic makes a really bad gun. Why? When plastic gets hot, it melts. When plastic gets cold, it cracks. It's a terrible way to make a gun. Indeed, this is one of the earlier prototypes. See this little rope over here? The reason why there's a rope was they would test it. They would put a rope on the trigger and send very far away and pull it. That way it wouldn't blow up in their hands. Okay? So making a gun out of plastic is idiotic. It's stupid. You're more likely to kill yourself than someone else. This is not a very effective weapon. Yet people are afraid of it. Now, is there a problem with making a 3D printed gun? I'm going to forget about New Jersey for a minute, because you guys got your own law. Everywhere else in the country, the answer is basically no. There's nothing wrong with making your own weapon, right? Because there's a long tradition of creating what are called zip guns. Now, I'm in Jersey here. Does anyone know what a zip gun is? No, you don't. I have to give different versions of this talk in different states. It's part of my routine. A zip gun is a homemade gun. Let me tell you something. You can make a gun that's a heck of a lot better than a plastic gun for about $15. If you go to the nearest Home Depot and you buy, ready for this, a soldering iron and a garden hose, you've just bought the parts you need to make a gun. It is so easy to cobble together a gun from homemade parts that using a 3D printer is possibly the worst way imaginable to do this. I found this picture on the internet. That's a keychain flashlight. You can make a gun out of a keychain flashlight. You don't need a $30,000 3D printer to do it. Now let me show you a demonstration. My friends, do not try this at home. These people are morons. But I want to show you how easy it is to make an undetectable weapon. You don't need a computer, okay? All you need is a piece of rubber tubing, a shotgun shell, and a pipe, and a flip phone camera, because that's how people roll back then, right? That's all you need. How does this work? At the end of the pipe, there's this little dimple, which is sharp. The idea is you load the shotgun shell into the tube, and you're going to jam the metal pipe into the back of the tube. You've just made a fully functional firearm for about $10 in parts. That's it. Now, what's wrong with what these guys are about to do?
He's holding the pipe.
Yeah, his hand's in front of the, I don't know, these guys are morons, right? But what's wrong, what else is wrong about this picture? Anyone see it? Yeah? Yeah? They're inside. And they're shooting out of a cardboard box with, see this? Wires. There is an electrical wire coming down and the fan that's plugged in. So again, these guys are absolute morons. They are not sophisticated. And they've managed to create a weapon for $10. They did not need anything. There's no serial number. There's no traceability. It's easy to make your own guns. And watch, ready? They're going to fire it. Ready? 1, 2, boom. Lethal weapon made from a rubber tube. I show you this to illustrate that the panic over 3D printed guns is so irrational. People are going to spend $20,000 on a printer, spend a week finishing it, when they can just go and buy something on the street of Camden 2 blocks away. This is an irrational fear. It's completely irrational. Which just doesn't resolve the constitutional question, but this is not something that government should really be worried about. We are so far away from the day where this problem actually exists that efforts to stop it now, I think, are so overblown. But we'll get there in a minute. Anyway, these guys are proud. They have their cartridge, etc. Have they broken the law? Federal law, no. Under federal law, you can make your own weapon. It's perfectly legal. You can't sell it. If you sell it, then you're in trouble. You need a license to sell it. But if you make the weapon for your own use, not interstate commerce, as they say, you are fine. Then what's the problem? Well, to this day, again, I'm accepting New Jersey, federal law doesn't prohibit the manufacture of your own firearms. But instead, the State Department has taken a different position. That it's a crime to share the files needed to make these devices. And that is where we run right into the First Amendment. The basic tenet of the First Amendment is you cannot impose prior restraints on speech. You can't stop them from speaking. You can punish them after the fact, but you can't stop them from speaking in advance. We've argued in several courts now, that these files are protected speech, that they're expressive, and that the government is restricting these files on the basis of their content. Now you might say, wait a minute, Josh, this speech is dangerous, right? You can use this information to create a gun, and guns are bad, okay, right? Well, anyone hear the Anarchist Cookbook, right? It's basically a handguide to be a terrorist. There have been long-time efforts to ban knowledge that people can use to harm others. A long, long-time effort. The courts have rejected all of these efforts. Wait a minute, Josh, we're not talking about a book, we're talking about code. My friends, information is speech. The courts have actually been fairly receptive to the idea that conveying information on a computer is expressive content, and the mere fact that you use zeros and ones does not deprive it of the First Amendment protection. In Srell v. IMS Health, a Supreme Court decision from a few years ago, the court held that the creation and dissemination of information are speech. It's creating it and disseminating it.
First of all, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. you. Do you mind if we let everyone?
No, I'm almost done. Let me finish, and then we can do it in the break, okay?
Okay.
Thank you so much. You guys will bear with me. I'm almost done, I promise. Okay? But I promise you not only one amendment, your donuts also, but I promise you the Second Amendment, right? The Second Amendment provides a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So far, the court hasn't said much about the Second Amendment. They will say more next year. But we know from DC v. Heller that the Second Amendment protects the right to bear arms in the home. And we know from McDonald v. Chicago, this right extends against the state governments as well as the federal government. But more than that, we don't really know. I have an argument, right? I argue that the Second Amendment includes a right to acquire arms, right? That's not to say that there can't be restriction who buys it, but as a general matter, you can't ban the sale of weapons altogether. And I think there's also a much more deeply rooted right to make arms. We have a fairly long-standing tradition in which people made their own weapons. Right before we had stores, gun stores, you would have to build your own device. So going back to the time of the founding, I think we have a fairly deeply rooted right to manufacture weapons. Why is this important? These restrictions on the files used infringe not only the First Amendment, but also the Second Amendment. Now, I don't think you have the right to 3D print a plastic undetectable firearm. I'm actually fairly careful about that. I think if the state wants to require a weapon to have a certain quantity of metal in it, they can do that. And if the state wants you to have a serial number so it can be tracked, I think that's probably also permissible under Heller. But banning the outright manufacture of these weapons for personal use, I think, goes too far. You also have the concept of a hybrid right, which is not very common. But sometimes when one right reinforces another, you get this greater tier of scrutiny. Right? What's at issue here is people are being silenced. They're being censored of how to build guns. I think it's a First and Second Amendment right. Let me go off script for a bit because this is my Jersey talk. I've been representing defense distributed since 2014, so I've been this 5 years already. We were engaged in a fairly lengthy battle with the State Department. After Sandy Hook, the Obama administration took the position that we need to use all of our executive powers to try to stop guns. And they found one way. They found that Cody Wilson, who put these files on the internet, was actually violating export control law, right? That it violated export control law to put a file on the internet. The government had never before taken this position, and in fact had suggested they couldn't apply export control law to publicly available speech. Okay, so we filed suit against the State Department. We lost in the district court. We lost in the Court of Appeals with a dissent. We lost in the en banc process with several dissents. And then the Supreme Court denied review on our preliminary injunction. Okay. We were actually feeling pretty good, though. We thought we had a shot on summary judgment. We went back to the district court. Then things took a different turn. The government, I think, agreed with us and decided to settle the case with us. In fact, the administration said we're going to shift our policy and recognize that we can apply export control law to public speech. We agreed. This began a very hectic period of my life, which I will tell you about now. So the settlement was to go into effect on Friday. Dates aren't wrong, but it was supposed to go into effect on Friday. On Tuesday, we get an emergency motion, a TRO, temporary restraining order motion, filed by gun control groups, the Brady campaign, Giffords, Every Town for Gun Violence, all of Michael Bloomberg's alter egos, right? They all sued us at once. And they sought to block our settlement agreement. What? They said that our settlement agreement was contrary to law. So I had to go to federal court in Austin, and I argued that I actually won. And the judge said, no, you can't intervene. Let them settle the case. Now, we got the settlement Friday afternoon, which gave us a license to publish these files. Cody, who was our client, was planning to publish the files the following Tuesday or Wednesday. He had a big PR push. And I called him and said, Cody, publish the files now. Publish the files now. Get these online before they have a chance to stop us. And he did. He published them that evening. Now, we didn't tell anyone. We kind of did low key, but it got out and people knew. So these files were on the internet for several days. And I said, what's going to happen next, Josh? So your AG Graywall had sent us several cease and desist letters. And I said, this guy's going to sue us in state court. I knew he would, right? I didn't know when. So I said, let's go on the offense. So that entire weekend, we prepared a complaint where we sued the AG of New Jersey for violating our rights, and we sued him first. We did it in federal court in Texas. But about 20 minutes before we sued your Attorney General, I got this frantic email from the guy across the river, Shapiro, the Attorney General of Pennsylvania. And he sought a TRO against us. He beat us by like 20 minutes. Man, the race to the courthouse is tight. ECF is a cruel mistress sometimes, but that's the electronic filing system. So he sued us. And he wanted a federal judge in Philadelphia to issue an ex parte TRO, that is a ruling without us even arguing, to block us from posting these files. I replied to the lawyer and said, excuse me, sir, we've already posted the files. Your entire brief is wrong. He's like, no, you have. I'm like, yeah, I gave him a link. He's like, well, we still want a TRO anyway to stop you from posting the files. It was insane. The judge, to his credit, held a hearing on Sunday afternoon. At the time, I was at the airport. I was at LaGuardia Airport in New York, possibly the worst airport in the United States. And the judge wanted me to do an oral argument by phone from the airport, with zero prep time and zero briefing. I argued the case, and I actually won that one. It's my few victories that week. And I told the judge, like, Judge, look, here's what we'll do. We will block anyone with a Pennsylvania IP address from accessing the files. Deny the TRO, and let's actually brief this and give me like a normal time, because I can't, we can't do this right now. So the judge said fine. He denied the TRO on the condition that we would block Pennsylvania IP addresses, which we did. By the way, no one had done that before. Right? That's like North Korea level stuff, right? It's never been done to block IP addresses of an entire state. It doesn't exist. We figured out how to do it. We did it. But I knew we weren't out of the woods yet. I was like, okay, Pennsylvania sued us first. By the way, they sued us in federal court. They had no federal question. There was no jurisdiction. It was an insane lawsuit. The judge actually told the Pennsylvania lawyer, have you ever filed a federal complaint before? He said, why are you not in state court? So I knew that case wasn't going to go anywhere. Okay. That was Sunday afternoon. I flew home to Houston. I said, okay, we're not done yet. Monday. Your lovely AG did exactly as I thought he would do. He sued us in Chancery Court. He filed a complaint in Essex County, that's Newark, Chancery Court, seeking, I swear to God, a nationwide injunction in Chancery Court to block us from putting files on the internet. One more time. He sought a nationwide injunction in Chancery Court to block us from putting a file on the internet. My goodness. And he wanted an ex parte order. Your tax dollars are well spent, my friends. So the next day, I argued this case before the judge. The judge was very good. I have no complaints. I think the judge there did the best he could. He had this huge thing dropped in his lap. I think he handled it in a very responsible fashion. And I was arguing this case, again, on the phone, right? Because I'm in Houston, he's in Newark. And I told him, I said, Judge, with all due respect, I don't think you have the jurisdiction in the Chancery Court to issue a nationwide injunction to prevent me from putting files on the internet. He said, you're probably right. I said, look, Judge, here's what I'll do. I will go ahead and I'll block New Jersey IP addresses, and we'll just deny the TRO. Let's brief this case and handle this in a more responsible manner. My only goal is keeping the website up. I didn't care if you people in New Jersey can't get the files. That didn't matter to me. And the judge said, fine. So on my argument, he denied the TRO. I was like, okay, Josh, feeling pretty good about that. I got my second, or I guess my third victory. But then the shoe dropped. The Washington Attorney General, the Washington AG, sued us in federal court in Seattle. We had no interest in Seattle. There's no jurisdiction there. We had no interest in Jersey either, but whatever. He sued us, and he sought to block our settlement. The Washington AG argued that our settlement violated the Administrative Procedure Act. What? That the decision of the executive branch to settle this case violated the APA. What? And I had to argue this case on basically no notice, again, by phone. There were a quorum full of people. I'm sitting there on my phone in Houston in my pajamas, right? That week, I had to brief and argue cases in 4 courts. I had 4 TROs in 5 days. It was a blitz. And I argued this case. I said, Judge, this would be a prior restraint of speech. It's a violation of the First Amendment. You shouldn't do this, blah, 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 blah. The judge asked me one question, as best as I can recall. The question he asked me was, Mr. Blackman, do you represent all the parties? What that meant is, can I rule against everyone now? And I did, kind of. So the judge announced from the bench, a couple minutes later, I'm going to issue the TRO. He blocked the settlement. And by enjoining the settlement, effectively that yanked our license. That yanked our permission to publish the files. So I had to then call Cody Wilson and give him the bad news. You're going to be lawyers soon, you'll have to do this. Give your client bad news. It's never fun. And I said, Cody, the judge issued a nationwide injunction against us. Take down the website. I started crying a little bit. It was a pretty emotional blitz. It took him a few hours, too. He built a lot of redundancies and firewalls to keep the site up, so he took it down so we complied with the court order. But that wasn't the end of it. We then continued our lawsuit against the Attorney General of New Jersey. The district court found that we had no jurisdiction, so we lost there. We filed the suit again in federal court in Newark, and that's still pending. I don't know where that's going to go, but that's going to go somewhere eventually. But eventually, a court of competent jurisdiction will get this issue. And I'm confident that the New Jersey law that your legislature enacted will not stand. It makes it a crime to share information that may be used to make a firearm. And I gave this argument to the judge. I said, look, judge, let's say I put online a blueprint to make a toy gun. And then someone modifies it to make it functional. I am now a felon because I used information that may be used to make a gun. Your statute is so broad that it sweeps in making firearm components like a nut or a screw or a bolt. This statute is not narrowly tailored in any meaningful sense. I don't think it withstands constitutional scrutiny. So I think ultimately we'll prevail. But even if we don't prevail for a couple of years, I'm happy. Why am I happy? Because we beat them. We put the files online before they sued to shut us down. We beat them. I knew their game. I knew exactly what they're going to do. I said, you put those files online right now. And we beat them. They're online. Google it. You will find them in 3 seconds. Actually, don't. You'll be violating law in this state. Did I just aid it? I think I was just aided and abetted the violation of New Jersey law. My goodness. But anyway, do it somewhere else. But that illustrates the point. It's now a crime for you to email a file in New Jersey that may be used to make a gun. It's a crime. It's a speech crime. We think it's unconstitutional. I'll stop here, get your donuts, and then Professor Maltz will take over afterwards. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
There's plates of that in, 4 boxes of donuts, there's coffee, I think 3
Oh, crap.
some kind of favorite What's up, Jack? How are you? So federal
I didn't worry about this. I mean, technically, I think I broke New Jersey law.
Of course, so is it legal to just show somebody how to make any gun? Or only 3D printed?
So the statute's not limited to 3D printed guns. I think it can even be a crime to show someone how to make a functional or non-functional firearm, a homemade gun, even with like a kit. Like let's say you show me how to mill a 80% lower. I think you violate New Jersey law.
Have you? Are there like blueprints for guns online?
Yeah.
Like if I go to like Winchester and like go like how to make a Winchester rifle, it'll come up online. Right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So like, you know, how could that be stopped?
Yeah. Well, the question whether it can be stopped is different than the state power, right? So we've argued in papers that these are pointless laws that don't actually solve the problem. And the AG say, well, New Jersey can act incrementally and try and solve little problems, but when you have a fundamental right like free speech, you can't act in such a hodgepodge manner.
Yeah. Yeah,
What's your name?
Edwin.
Edwin, hey, Josh. Thank you for coming by.
No, great speech. Yeah, I was like, really people don't look at it from that sense of the argument. Most people are like guns or against guns or pro guns.
Yeah, it's a free speech issue.
Yeah.
Your AG just doesn't see it. He thinks that there's no protected value here. And I've argued against it now in 4 courts. I lost count.
Yeah.
And she'll need it. Maybe I'll have some coffee.
It's
Maybe
like the bad image of guns. That's what the problem.
Oh, it's
the main
scary.
issue. That's what it is. It's
Yeah.
just a political issue. You just want to be against guns because guns kill people. So
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's like people, need to protect themselves as well.
Are you from New
And it's
Jersey?
right. From New York.
Whereabouts?
Long Island, I grew up in Long Island, I lived in Queens for a while.
I grew up in Staten Island, so I didn't touch a gun until I was 18 years old. I'm sorry, until I was 20, shoot, maybe 21 years old, 22 years old. I never touched a gun.
I've never touched it. Oh, when I was little, I did. When I was like 12, but in Colombia.
Oh man, you gotta go to a range.
Yeah. I know, I'm gonna go with my wife.
Pennsylvania had good gun laws. I might be slipping though.
There's a great range here in New Jersey, actually, that you can go and shoot like a bunch of guns. But it's so weird, like you can go and shoot anything, and you can't even know how it's made. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
technically, like if they give you a gun to shoot, you could just look at it and figure it out. Is that it? All right.
No, and I told them this is done and they're giving us their money. Yeah. I'll call the one that's done and I'll say, we're getting.
Whenever you're ready, sir. Yeah, my mic's in there. If you want to put that thing in piles. Yeah, these chairs are terrible.
What is it to say? I just want to call the wrong one and like yell at them and then they're like. Next time we're not ordering, we're gonna go elsewhere. Yeah, if we get a free whole thing next time, then maybe good. Wait, do you know what any of these are? Do you know what any of these are? Yeah, but like, what are these fancy ones? Like, what's this Chocolate coffee?
Oh, you're filming me. I want to protect my copyright.
Yeah, I don't believe so.
So I always like it when people drink coffee before I talk, because otherwise they tend to fall asleep. And I also hope that, I'm going to take a little different angle on this, and I hope you won't think this is what I sometimes describe to my students as the Stephen Stills theory of talking about things. I'm old enough to remember Stephen Stills before he was bald and fat, and he had a song called "If You Can't Be With the One You Love, Love the One You're With," also known as the STD song. But so I'm not specifically going to talk about guns, but I do think that Professor Blackman's very interesting presentation points up a more general kind of, I want to talk about how it points up a larger kind of issue. The issue is as follows. So we have a disagreement about guns in this country. And I should say up front that I am not a gun guy, but trust me, my argument in my case, I'm probably the only person that applies whether to guns and also things which I find, government regulations which I find not appropriate. So, but we have a problem with guns. And so this is how things work in the United States. That we have people who are supposed to deal with policy issues about guns or policy issues about anything, right? Policy issues about guns, policy issues about anti-discrimination laws, policy issues about religious exemption to anti-discrimination laws. right? We have law, well, in this case, unfortunately, as Professor Blackman suggests, all too often, we get knee-jerk reactions, but people are supposed to think about these things and make policies about these things. But what then happens in the United States of America? That no matter what the policy issue is, no matter what well thought out or not thought out, whether it's a progressive policy or a more conservative policy, what we have immediately is that somebody goes to court and argues that that policy is unconstitutional. You have parentheses. When I describe things that way, I am not criticizing Professor Blackman. That's not my point. The problem is that we have created a culture where that's what you do. And we have these vast amounts of litigation, again, largely not your fault, I understand in this context, because then we have backlash litigation going on as well. So in Oregon, for example, we have, probably some of you have heard about these teenagers that are being glorified in the progressive media because they are arguing in a federal district court in Oregon that they have a constitutional right to have the federal government prevent climate change. And you know what's even sicker? That the lawyers, instead of the lawyers bringing that lawsuit, being sanctioned, the judge ruled in their favor. So here's my point. What does that have to do with guns? Well, nothing in particular, I suppose, except that I think that there is a problem in this country about the whole concept of constitutional litigation. And I'm probably I'm one of the few people left who will take that position with respect to progressive arguments and with respect to conservative arguments. The way that Professor Blackman described this, and I think that was a very interesting description of this complicated litigation, right? And thinking, isn't this a crazy way to decide a question about, such as this, about 3D guns? And you know 10 times as much about 3D guns as I do. Now I take that back. An infinite amount of more about 3D guns. 3D guns? Whoa, I need some coffee. 3D guns than I do, because I know nothing about 3D guns. I'm like Sergeant Schultz, none of you know who Sergeant Schultz is. And briefly, it is that we need to think about this. We need to think about the culture that we've created. And frankly, it's a problem that goes back not so much to, I don't attribute it to conservatives, it goes back to things that I have from my history about it. Started with progressives, and then there was conservatives said, well, if they can do it, we can do it too. We need to think about that kind of culture. That's not the way we ought to be deciding issues in this country. That's not the way the government should be deciding issues. That we should have the policy people who are in charge of deciding issues about guns, about religious exemptions to anti-discrimination laws, about, that's right, I forgot, we now not only have the lawsuit in Oregon, we have the Green New Deal, which is, I gather, related to the lawsuit in Oregon in some ways, and maybe that's going to be constitutionalized in some. And so I would suggest that these aren't the kind of policy judgments that ought to be made as a matter of constitutional law at all. But what that does is, whether it is by originalism or something else, creates rigidities in the system which aren't good for having the government be able to adapt policies to changes in technology like 3D printers and how they can do things. And again, I'm not making any comment at all about whether this is a good law or a bad law or anything else. But I think if you listen to Professor Blackman's story, you hear about how much more expensive and complicated the issue of policy judgments is in this country because of this culture that we've created. And I would blow the culture up entirely, but that's not going to happen. But I think that we should think about the culture. And that's all I have to say. As I said, that's not. Now, I'm sure that's what you expected when you came somebody talk about guns and 3D printers, but that's all I know about this subject. Thank you. There you go.
I think you're all fortunate that Professor Malt's here. I think he's a dying breed, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way. There are not many scholars who stick to the restraint line, the line of judicial restraint across the board. Most people do it sort of like a buffet, where they like restraint here, but they don't like restraint there. I think Professor Malt is a gem, and I mean that sincerely, that he sticks to his guns. I am not a restraint guy. I think when a state seeks a nationwide injunction to block me from putting a file on the internet, I'm going to court. And in fact, I wasn't to blame for that case. He sued us. And then I sued him for violating our civil rights. So this is one of these weird cases where this law was enacted, I think without due consideration for fairly well-established free speech principles, and I'd be happy to litigate this case all the way up to the US Supreme Court. We're able to say, let it go, just let the people in Trenton figure it out. They can't do everything in Trenton. Very good. Okay, I'll stop here, and I hope you have some questions as well. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes. Intersperse. You do one, we'll come back to it, okay?
Everyone knows me as the one that will take notes and ask questions.
I love it. Thank you.
First, I know that you said that there is no federal law that bans a person creating and manufacturing their own gun. Is New Jersey the only state that has a ban on that practice, or do other states, other states that follow suit?
California has a law that regulates manufacturing guns at home, but it's different. It requires you to obtain a serial number, which can be obtained in a fairly easy fashion. New Jersey makes it a crime unless you're a designated manufacturer of guns, which is basically impossible to be. So as far as I know, and I'm not sure about it, I'm pretty sure on this, New Jersey is the only state that bans it altogether unless you're a designated manufacturer. Yeah. Just ask your question.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, no, who else? Someone has a question?
No, I haven't.
Okay, him,
yeah?
go.
All right, cool.
Go, run down your list.
So my next question is, has a bill to federally ban homemade guns ever been introduced? And then follow up, has there ever been a court case about, because you were saying how the Second Amendment doesn't really talk about it, but you would argue that the Second Amendment gives you the right to manufacture a gun as well. Has that ever been actually brought through the court system, or has a bill designed to either ban or regulate the creation of guns by an individual?
Well, believe it
or
or not, we have a law called the Undetectable Firearms Act. It was enacted in the 1980s, I think 1987 or 88. It requires all guns to have a certain quantity of metal to trigger a metal detector. Why did Congress in the 1980s pass this law? You can make an undetectable firearm of anything. And this was an issue in the 80s at plastic guns. It's nothing new. Your question, has there ever been a court case about that law? Not that, I don't think there's ever been a challenge to it. I would even say under Heller, having a block of metal in a gun is permissible. I don't have a problem with that. In terms of the right to make weapons, this is generally not an issue because virtually every state allows you to, right? There's never been a prohibition on home manufacture. There have been cases about the right to acquire arms, and DOJ has argued that you have no right to acquire arms, no right to sell guns. Some courts have disagreed, and that's an issue that's trickling through. Keep going.
So
I got them all.
when you are creating a 3D gun blueprint in the technology, whatever the heck, is there any brand issue? Because I'm sure that, like, and I know I should have done that. I'm sure that an AR-15, that someone makes money every time one of those is sold because they're the ones that designed it. Are these just kind of like certain things we'll just kind of give out to the public domain? Is there just a generic AR-15 like prototype that we're then just
Very good question. Intellectual property is an issue here, right? Were I to put online the blueprints of a Glock handgun, Glock would send me a very nice demand letter saying don't do that. All the weapons that my client has shared are all open source, they're all public domain, and there are no IP issues. So we don't have that issue here. But good question.
So.
Anyone else?
I warned y'all.
Anyone else want to get a question in?
No, I'll switch over.
Yeah, okay, switch up a bit, thank you.
We were just discussing before, guns compared to other weapons that can be made at home. Is there a blade or?
New Jersey law does not ban blades and knives, even though you can make those far more easily with a 3D printer.
Okay, and like bombs and other type of firearms, is any of that included in the same?
No, explosives are not covered.
So the law prohibits
only-
making a gun but not a bomb?
Yeah, we've actually argued this renders the law under-inclusive, that if they were actually worried about keeping people safe, they would ban more stuff. And the fact they only targeted one gun is what's called under-inclusiveness in the First Amendment context. But good question. Yeah, I had a student, I gave this talk last week at another school, and she does cosplay. You know what this is? Where you go to these comic conventions, you dress up, and she 3D prints swords. I never even thought of this, but you know, you go to a comic convention, you 3D print a sword, the blade's not sharp, but look, you serrate it, and now you have a weapon. And she was actually worried that her cos swords could be illegal under New Jersey law. And I said, no, it's not blades, it's not knives, it's only guns. But if you cosplay a gun,
Yeah, like a Star Wars guy.
yeah, if you start, and I made this point to the judge, if you, let's say you make a non-functional plastic firearm, and then I hack it and I tweak it to make it functional, the fact that you put code that may be used to make a gun, you are not liable. And I think it's a strict liability offense. There's no mens rea requirement either. You're basically a felon based on a derivative someone downstream does, which is why I think this law cannot stand. But yeah, but good question about the 3D, about Star Wars gun. Okay, I think a question over here?
I'm wondering about like effectiveness. What role does effectiveness or certainty play in? Like, you showed the example like the person using tubing and then using something to kind of trigger the puncture the back needle. Now, obviously, that would be less effective than a fully operational firearm that you buy from a gun store. But what role does? You're saying that we're okay with people creating these kind of, what in my mind is kind of a less certain way of getting the job done, in the sense that you're going to use it for, bad purposes. Like, obviously, there's a difference between a fully functioning handgun and someone standing with 3 pieces of pipe and something like to
I see your point.
needle directly on the back.
Look,
and trigger it.
I showed you a picture of a keychain flashlight, which is a heck of a lot easier to smuggle than a fully functional gun. Let me look. So the Liberator is a crappy gun, right? It's plastic, it cracks, it's not very accurate, you can't really aim it. You're more likely to lose fingers than to actually shoot someone with the thing. It's going to blow up in your hand. But your point's well taken, right? Generally, the courts don't say to the government, well, you're not really worried about this, right? This is not a big problem, it's a little problem, so you don't have to worry about it, right? That's the general frame, right? I don't object to it in general. We are not saying you have the right to print the guns, and be very careful, I didn't say that. All we're saying, you have the right to share the information. So New Jersey has this law that bans the sharing of the information and printing the guns. We have not challenged the second part of actually printing guns. We haven't challenged that. Maybe we could, maybe we don't, I don't know. But we haven't challenged that. Our primary concern is the first part, about the information. Right? If you want to ban the end product, go for it, but you can't ban the information to get there. And that's our position. That's my position all along. Yes, sir?
Could you clarify for those of us who are maybe a little bit less familiar with firearms, when the government goes to regulate firearms, like what means to have a serial number?
Okay, very good question.
There was a successfully printed lower receiver.
Okay.
Can you clarify that?
So again, I am from Staten Island. Where's my Staten Island? The Lexus person bounced. Oh, she got her points and ran. I see. Where from Staten Island?
I was born in Conville.
Tottenville. That was my zone high school.
Oh, nice.
Where did you go for high school? You went to Tottenville?
Well, I was in Jersey by then, but yeah.
Where'd you go for elementary school?
I did the elementary in Jersey.
Oh,
but I
come
got out
on.
of kindergarten age.
You got out. Oh, forget it. Forget it. Okay, well, I went to IS-7, which is very near, it was like a few blocks from Tottenville.
We used to go to the campground right across from Wagner High School.
Very good. Anyway, we're reminiscing of the place we didn't actually live in, together at least. How does a gun work, right? I never touched a gun until I was 25, so I didn't know any of this stuff. So if you don't, it's fine. Most parts of a gun, the federal government doesn't care about. They only care about usually one part, right? So for example, on an AR-15, the gun everyone knows about, probably never shot it, there's a part called the receiver. It's this little block of metal that holds the gun together. That part needs a serial number. Everything else in the gun you can buy in a kit online. And if you manufacture the gun at home, you're okay. Now, New Jersey law makes it a crime to manufacture even a metal gun, not just plastic guns. You can't even put together a metal gun. Now, I'll wrap up. Some people are starting to move, so I'll be done quickly. The only part that requires a serial is the lower receiver, right? But if you make your own receiver under federal law, you don't need a serial number. Okay. People are going. I don't want to. Yeah. Yeah.
So with the Liberator, 3D printer only prints individual parts, right?
Yes.
You still need to put the parts together.
And it's very complicated.
Exactly.
It takes almost a week to make one of these things.
Putting together a normal standard issue weapon is nearly impossible unless you're guns
Yeah.
Printing this 3D.
It's really hard.
Would the information shared have to be done together at the same point?
Yeah, but even if you follow the instructions, you're probably going to screw it up. And let me make this point very bluntly. You have to actually treat the plastic with this chemical acetone bath. So it's hard enough to withstand the combustion. If you don't make the barrel of the right consistency, it'll blow up in your hand. It is so hard to make these guns. And the technology is not going to get better. I always get this question. Plastic will never be strong enough to handle a bullet. It just won't. Plastic sucks. That's not what it's designed for. Now, you can 3D print metal. Why would you do that? But you can 3D print metal, which is really expensive, but then you can use real metal. So this is a technology that I think is mostly driving fear and not a rational discourse. Yeah, in the back.
Based on the difficulty conversation and the like, is it a safety issue?
Oh, I always get this question. Yeah, a tort issue, right? I mean, look, if you sold these plastic guns, not that you could, and someone blew their head up, I guess you'd have a product liability suit.
You as the person printing it, the manufacturer.
Oh, you're saying the state can prevent you from printing it so that you don't hurt yourself. Is that your argument?
I'm asking if that argument's made.
Again, I haven't argued you have a right to print them. There might be an argument that letting people do these things at home is destructive. But in that case, I don't think that would be a felony. That'd be maybe something far more like a zoning code violation. If you have like a broken sidewalk or something. But these are treated as felonies. Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be a tort issue if anything, but not a felony that you go to jail with a gun offense. Yeah.
As a progressive, I really want to be on your side on this because I made a mental analogy in my head to even in a state where weed's not legal, you still want a book about it.
Oh, let me give you a good example.
That allows you to
Yeah.
grow it or whatever. You should still be able to have that information.
Yeah.
I am wondering, is there a difference between the anarchist cookbook that has instructions on a piece of paper and something that you just click and drag to download and then you have a machine without having to have any level of skill at all to then be able to create,
Right.
Let's get real, eventually the metal version or a stronger plastic or whatever, eventually we're going to have an easy and cheap way of creating a very potentially dangerous weapon in the wrong hands. Like eventually that will be easy and cheap.
Yeah. Yeah, so let me answer your question. Yeah, I will. I get this question all the time. So let me answer the question two ways. First, rather than weed, let's say the state passes a law that makes it a crime to 3D print sex toys, right? Custom dildos, right? It's a crime to put these files on the internet. We put this in our brief. We actually put this argument in brief that the state says it's a crime to share information of 3D print sex toys. It's immoral. People should not be using these things. Okay, that's your example, right? Now, if the technology advanced to the point where it was simply point, click, shoot, I think I would take a different position. If it's purely automated and there's no human intervention, I think the First Amendment argument is a heck of a lot weaker. But because so much human interaction goes into making these weapons, I think we're still within the bounds of the First Amendment.
So you would be okay with it until we reach that point when it becomes that simple and then we would have to readdress it?
And so the question here is one of incrementalism, right?
Okay.
Right. Generally, when you're dealing with what's called the rational basis test, the government can act incrementally. They can say, well, we're banning this now because we think something else might be a problem down the road. That doesn't work in the First Amendment context, where you have to enact laws based on actual threats, not just mere conjecture. And that's where we draw the line. The threats from New Jersey are purely conjectural. They're not real. They describe a technology that's maybe decades away at the earliest, right? I've been on this case now for 6 years. Technology hasn't advanced anywhere. It's the same. The same plastic gun exists, okay? So if we get to the point where there's no human interaction, I think there's a greater argument that the First Amendment is weaker. But where we are today, and we've been for the last 5 years, I think it's an even much easier case. Thank you for the question. Yeah, thank you. No, again, you have to look at how much human interaction goes into it. The more humans interact, the more speechy it is. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't understand what that means. No matter how much easier it gets, there's human interaction, unless it's a robot just on its own.
Yeah, that. So, I mean, okay, so I'll use an easier example, right? If you want to make a cup of coffee, right? You can grind the beans by hand, or you can use a machine to grind it, but you're still doing stuff yourself. Or you can go to 7-Eleven, put a cup of coffee there, and click dispense, right? You know, right, it does it automatically, right? You didn't do anything. It just kind of spit out. And if you got to a point where a gun just sort of spit out by pressing a button, I think the person actually pressing the button would have a far weaker claim. Now, the person who coded the machine, who actually designed the automated machine, I think he would have some issues because he developed the code. But if you're just pushing a button and a gun pops out.
Isn't that more just what you were going earlier when you're not defending the printing?
Exactly. So let's say you give me the source code for the coffee machine, right? And I have the source code for the coffee machine. I think it's a far weaker argument that this exchange of code is protected, right? Usually when you develop and you program, you write in one language and you compile it, if you're coders, right? When you compile the code, it becomes sort of automated. Sort of automated code that just spits it out, I think is entitled to less protection than the sort of expressive code that you yourself might program. But good question. Yes, in the back?
So if somebody's injured by a 3D-printed gun, would it hypothetically be, the responsibility or liability of the person who actually printed it?
You mean someone pulled the trigger or they blew up in his hand? Which one? Because if you shoot someone, you're going to jail, right?
Well, somebody can put that information out there, which like I would download, and let's say.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying? Like I just
Yeah.
download it.
And then you made it, and then
I have my
based on my
phone.
defective blueprints, right? Product liability.
Like, let's say it backfires and injured me.
And that's not through your fault. You followed the instructions perfectly, and it was my fault in the design
I just
defect.
download it.
Well, you got to print it, right? You can't just download it. Thank you, sir.
I don't know if that's on a 3D printer, so maybe this is something bad.
A lot. No, but it's a good question, right? Let me sign this more broadly, right? Let's say you're driving a Tesla car, right? These little super duper cars, and let's say you put in autopilot, as people are wont to do, and let's say you're on the highway going 70 miles an hour in autopilot, and then your software crashes. It freezes, defect. You get killed. Is that a problem of the auto manufacturer, or is that a liability issue for the person who coded it, who developed the code? So we have Boeing aircrafts, right? You have the 737 MAX, which I've flown on. It survived. But if you have a defect in the plane or a defect in the software, how do you attribute liability? The question you're asking is not just limited to 3D guns. It's how do you afford product design liability for someone who programs? And that program is used as part of a mechanical device. It's actually a very tough question, but you're exactly on the right track. Please.
I think one thing you wanted Professor Blackman talked about earlier that you want to think about is the distinction between the prior restraint and the
Yeah.
and
After the
damage
fact.
and the
Yeah.
fact, so that you could make an analogy just off the top of my head about libel laws or something like that. I mean, I have to spin that a little further. That is, if you knowingly disseminate information which turns out to be dangerous, which turns to the user of this information, then you have a different kind of product liability argument. Remember, there was a distinction between, for example, maps and books, right? Remember that? Shorts. So the question is it more like a map or is it more like just a book with information? Right? So, but I think the key distinction, one of the key distinctions that you do need to think about for First Amendment purposes is the distinction between prior restraint, which was the problem you had, and the problem of subsequent damage from this.
Yeah. Thank you. Very good question. So, hand over there. Yeah.
Do you think there's something inherently different between sharing code versus selling a machine that's expressly made to mill the lower receiver?
Okay, so the milling, what's milling, right? My client also developed a little gadget called the Ghost Gunner. And the way this thing works is you put in this metal device, this metal block, and then it automatically drills the holes in it and it makes it functional, right? So you put in what's called an 80%, right? It's basically the part's 80% finished. And this device mills the remaining 20%. The government, New Jersey accepted, doesn't really care about the device. It's just a thing with drills. But the government did care about the code used to program it. And we've argued that this code also has expressive value, is protected. So there you go. Thank you for the question. Any other questions? Yeah.
I don't know how much you know this, but do you think Cody Wilson's being unfairly targeted by the government right now?
Well, let me say this. When your governor, Murphy, signed the bill into law, he mentioned my client by name. And when the Attorney General was standing next to him, he mentioned, like, we got to stop the Cody Wilsons of the world. So, I mean, literally, your government has passed a law, and when they signed it, they named my client. You don't get that. That's pretty good. It was good for our papers. But look, I mean, Cody made a name for this. He put these files online. We got them online. We beat you guys by 3 days. Not you, but your state. And the files are on the internet, and they're out. They're in the internet. You can get them anywhere you want. And I will claim a victory there. I hope I don't get indicted from this talk. Maybe I should. Next time I land at Newark, you'll see me in the news. Anything else? All right, thank you all so much. I appreciate it.